The scent hit him before the light did, and Cale Ashbourne's whole body went still in the shadows of the auction hall. He had walked into this rotten place with one purpose: find the men running the illegal sale of Omegas, learn their names, and end them before the sun rose. That was the plan his mind had carried through the door. But his wolf had other plans, and his wolf did not care about plans at all. The scent came from the stage, from behind a curtain that had not yet opened, and it curled through the smoky air like a hand reaching straight into his chest. Wildflowers after rain, warm skin in early morning light, a scent he had memorized on their wedding night 3 years ago, and had grieved every single day since. It could not be real. Cale pressed his shoulder against the stone pillar at the back of the hall, and forced his breathing to slow. Around him, cloaked alphas from a dozen packs murmured over glasses of dark wine, their eyes hungry, their voices low. None of them noticed the king standing among them, in a plain gray coat with the hood pulled low. None of them noticed his hands curling into fists at his sides. Lyra was dead. He had held the report in his own hands. He had stood over the burned wreckage of the border village, where the raid took place, had smelled ash and blood there, had called her name into empty air until his throat gave out. There had been no body to bury, only the scraps of her cloak, torn and stained, found half a mile from where the fire had burned hottest. He had kept that cloak in a locked chest ever since, because it was the only piece of her the world had left him. So he told himself this scent was a trick. A cruel Omega perfume, brewed by some merchant who wanted to raise the price of his merchandise by luring the most powerful men in the room. It happened, sometimes. Unscrupulous traders knew that alphas paid more for an Omega whose scent reminded them of someone they had lost. He told himself this, and he did not believe a single word of it. The curtain moved. A man with a scarred jaw and a voice like gravel stepped onto the small wooden stage, one hand raised for silence. The room quieted at once, hunger sharpening every face in the crowd. "Tonight," the man said, "we have something rare, something that does not come to market twice in a lifetime." He snapped his fingers, and a second figure was led out from behind the curtain, by a chain looped loosely around one wrist. She wore a plain gray dress that hung past her knees, and a smooth white mask that covered the upper half of her face, leaving only her mouth and chin visible. Her hair was dark and unbound, falling past her shoulders in soft waves. Her hands were bound in front of her, not tightly, but enough to keep her still. Cale's heart stopped. It was the way she stood, chin lifted even in chains, shoulders back even in fear. He had seen that same posture across a training yard 100 times, watching Lyra refuse to bow her head to anyone, not even to him, not even when he had been nothing but a stubborn young alpha trying to win her attention. The scent grew stronger as she was walked closer to the front of the stage, and every instinct in Cale's body screamed the same word, over and over. "Mate! Mate! Mate!" He shoved off the pillar and moved through the crowd before conscious thought caught up with him, his hood falling back as he reached the front row of bidders. A few alphas glanced at him, recognized the sharp lines of his face beneath the gray hood, and quickly looked away again, choosing silence over confrontation with the King of Blackthorn. The auctioneer's eyes lit up at the sight of him. A king in the crowd meant a bidding war worth remembering. "We will start," the man announced, "at 2,000 silver." A hand went up near the back, then another. Numbers climbed through the smoky air, voices overlapping, greed thick enough to taste. Cale said nothing, not yet, watching the masked woman on the stage instead. She did not flinch at the numbers being shouted for her. She did not look afraid the way a stolen Omega should look afraid. She looked, if anything, exhausted, as though this had happened before, and she had already run out of tears for it. Her head turned, slow and searching, scanning the crowd the way a soldier might scan for the nearest exit, and for one heartbeat, her gaze crossed his. Even behind the mask, even in dim candlelight, Cale felt the impact of it, like a blow to the ribs. Her eyes were the same deep brown he had once traced with his thumb on quiet mornings, the same eyes that had looked up at him on the day he claimed her as his mate. She did not recognize him, that much was clear. Her gaze slid past him without pause, without hesitation, the same way it slid past every other stranger in the room. But her scent did not lie. Scent could not be forged, not truly, not down to the marrow of it. Perfumes could mimic notes on the surface, but they could never fake the way a true mate's scent settled into an alpha's bones and refused to leave. 10,000 silver, Cale said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the noisy room like a blade through fog. Every head turned. The auctioneer's mouth curled into a satisfied smile. 10,000, he repeated, savoring the number. Do we have 11? A rival alpha near the side wall, a broad man wearing furs from some cold northern territory, lifted his chin. 11,000. Cale did not even look at him. 20,000. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. 20,000 silver was more than most border packs earned from trade in an entire season. The northern alpha's jaw tightened, calculating whether his pride was worth bankrupting his territory over. And after a long, tense pause, he shook his head and stepped back. No one else dared raise a hand after that. Sold, the auctioneer said, grinning wide enough to show a chipped tooth. To the gentleman in gray. Cale did not correct him. Let the man believe he was buying from an anonymous stranger with deep pockets and no name. It would be safer for everyone if word did not spread tonight that the Alpha King of Blackthorn had personally attended an illegal auction and paid a small fortune for a masked Omega. He stepped forward to claim her, and the crowd parted for him without needing to be told twice. Up close, the mask hid more of her face than he expected, curving down past her cheekbones, leaving only her lips and the stubborn set of her jaw visible. But her scent, unblocked by any fabric, rose to meet him in full force, and his wolf nearly buckled under the weight of 3 years of grief, crashing straight into 3 seconds of impossible hope. You're free of the chain, he said quietly, reaching for the metal cuff around her wrist. I am not going to hurt you. She pulled her arm back before his fingers made contact, putting as much distance between them as the small stage allowed. Her voice, when it came, was low and rough with unshed anger. You bought me. That does not make you kind. That makes you the highest bidder. It was her voice. Not identical, perhaps, roughened by something he could not name, but underneath the roughness was the same cadence, the same stubborn edge that had once told him off in front of his entire council for underestimating her. What is your name? He asked, keeping his own voice steady, even as his hands shook faintly at his sides. She lifted her chin another inch. Does it matter to a man who just paid 20,000 silver for a stranger? It matters to me more than you know. Something flickered behind the mask, a brief shift in her breathing, gone before he could name it. Then she looked away, toward the exit at the back of the hall, toward freedom that did not yet exist for her. Take me wherever you're taking me, she said. I've learned that arguing changes nothing. The words landed like a stone in his chest. Someone had taught her that. Someone had broken her down enough that she expected nothing from the world except being moved from one cage to another. The fury that rose in him then was quiet and cold and far more dangerous than any shout could have been. He led her out through a side door, past guards who did not question a paying customer collecting his purchase, and into the cool night air beyond the auction hall. His own guard, Draven, waited by the horses exactly where Cale had left him, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. Draven's eyes went first to Cale's face, then to the masked woman beside him, and his brows drew together in confusion. You were supposed to be gathering names, Draven said, not buying company. Get us home, Cale said. Now. Something in his tone must have told Draven this was not the moment for argument, because the beta simply nodded and swung up onto his horse, without another word. Cale helped the masked woman onto his own horse, careful not to grip her too tightly, aware of how she stiffened at even the gentlest contact. She settled in front of him with visible reluctance, spine straight, refusing to lean back against him even for balance. As they rode through the dark forest road toward Blackthorn territory, her scent wrapped around him with every gust of wind, undeniable, unmistakable, impossible. He had buried an empty cloak 3 years ago and called it a funeral. Now the woman wearing his mate's scent sat in front of him on his own horse, cold and guarded and utterly convinced she owed him nothing, not even her name. Cale stared at the back of her head, at the dark hair the moonlight turned silver, and made himself a silent promise. Whatever had happened to her, whoever had taken 3 years of her life and replaced her memory with fear, he would find the truth of it, even if it meant tearing his own kingdom apart to do so. Because dead women did not bleed warmth into an empty cloak, dead women did not carry a scent that made a grieving alpha's heart remember how to beat again. Whoever she believed herself to be tonight, One truth had settled into his bones the moment he caught her scent across that crowded room. She was his mate, and someone had gone to terrible lengths to make the whole world, including her, believe otherwise. The ride back to Blackthorn stretched long into the night, but for the first time in 3 years, Cale did not feel the hollow ache of grief pressing against his ribs. In its place sat something far more dangerous: hope, sharp enough to cut, and a growing certainty that the truth waiting at the end of this road would change everything he thought he knew about the day his world had supposedly ended. The gates of Blackthorn's stronghold rose out of the darkness like a promise Cale was no longer sure he deserved to keep. Torches burned along the top of the stone wall, and the guards on duty straightened at the sight of their king returning earlier than expected, and with an unfamiliar rider in front of him. No one asked questions as the horses passed through. No one dared. Cale dismounted first, then reached up to help the masked woman down. She avoided his hands again, sliding off the horse on her own, boots landing hard on the packed dirt of the courtyard. She stumbled slightly from the long ride, and he caught her elbow on instinct before she could fall. She yanked her arm free the moment she found her footing. "I can stand," she said. "I never doubted it." Draven watched the exchange from atop his own horse, arms folded, saying nothing, though his eyes carried 100 unspoken questions. Cale ignored all of them for now. "Take the horses to the stable," Cale told him. "I will explain everything soon. Tonight, I need the healer brought to my private chambers, quietly, and I need no one else disturbed." Draven hesitated only a moment, before nodding and leading both horses away, leaving Cale alone, in the torchlit courtyard, with the masked stranger, who smelled like every memory he had tried and failed to bury. She stood with her bound wrists held stiffly in front of her, gaze sweeping over the towering stone walls, the wide staircases, the banners bearing the black wolf crest of his pack. Something passed behind her expression, quick and unreadable, gone before he could study it. "This is your home," she said. Not quite a question. "It was supposed to be yours too, once." Her head turned sharply toward him. What does that mean? He should not have said it yet. Not without proof, not without the healer's confirmation, not without giving her time to adjust to the impossible idea that a life she did not remember was waiting to reclaim her. But 3 years of silence had worn thin every ounce of his patience, and the words had slipped free before he could stop them. "It means I need you to trust me for 1 more hour," he said instead, softening the moment as best he could. "Just 1 hour. Then I will explain everything I know, and you can decide for yourself what to believe." She studied him for a long moment, the torchlight flickering gold across the visible half of her face. Whatever she saw in his expression seemed to settle something in her, because she gave a small, tight nod. 1 hour, she agreed. "Then I want answers. Real ones, not riddles." He led her inside, up the wide staircase toward his private wing, very aware of every guard and servant who paused to stare as they passed. By morning, the whole stronghold would know the king had brought home a masked stranger from the depths of the forest. He would deal with the rumors when the sun rose. Right now, none of it mattered beside the woman walking silently at his side. His chambers were exactly as he had left them that morning, cold and orderly and empty, in a way that had nothing to do with the size of the rooms. A fire had been lit by the servants in anticipation of his return, casting warm light across the stone walls and the heavy wooden furniture within. She stopped just inside the doorway, taking in the space with the same careful, searching look she had given the courtyard below. "Sit," Cale said gently, gesturing toward a chair near the fire. "Please." She sat, though her spine remained straight, her bound hands resting in her lap, every muscle coiled as though she expected the floor to open beneath her at any moment. A soft knock sounded at the door a few minutes later. Cale opened it to find Draven standing beside an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight braid and sharp, assessing eyes. Elara had served as healer to the Blackthorn pack for longer than Cale had been alive, and she had been the one who examined the scraps of cloak found after the raid 3 years ago. If anyone could tell him whether the impossible sitting in his chair was real, it was her. "You said this could not wait until morning," Elara said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, her gaze already moving past Cale, toward the masked figure by the fire. "It cannot," Cale said. "I need you to examine her, carefully, and I need you to tell me the truth, whatever that truth turns out to be." Alara's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the weight behind his words, but she said nothing further, and crossed the room toward the fire. The masked woman tensed as the healer approached, drawing back slightly in the chair. "I only wish to look at you, child," Alara said, her voice gentler than Cale had heard it in years. "No harm will come to you here. I promise you that." After a long pause, the woman gave a small nod of permission. Alara knelt beside the chair and reached up, slowly, giving every warning of her movement before her fingers touched the edge of the mask. The woman flinched, but did not pull away this time. With careful hands, Alara lifted the smooth white covering free. The firelight fell fully across her face for the first time, and Cale's breath left his body in a single, ragged exhale. It was Lyra, older by 3 years, thinner in the cheeks, a thin silver scar tracing from her temple down to her jaw that had not existed before, but unmistakably, undeniably Lyra. The same dark brows, the same stubborn mouth, the same eyes that had once looked at him across a crowded hall and made him forget every argument he had planned to make about why they should not be mates. Alara's hand trembled as she reached toward the woman's cheek, tracing the line of the scar with the lightest touch. "Great moon above," Alara whispered. "It cannot be." The woman pulled back from both of them, confusion and alarm flashing across her face in equal measure. "Why are you both looking at me like that? Like I've come back from the dead?" "Because you have," Cale said quietly. "At least, that is what we were told to believe." "My name is Mira," she said firmly, as though repeating it enough times might make it true again. "I have told you that already." "Your name," Alara said softly, still staring at her with tears gathering unshed in her eyes, "is Lyra Ashbourne. You were mated to this man 3 years ago, in the great hall 2 floors below this very room. I stood beside you both when the bond was sealed." Mira's face went pale. She shook her head, once, sharply. "No, that's not possible. I would remember something like that. I would remember a life like that." "Would you?" Alara asked, not unkindly. "Tell me, child, what do you remember of the past 3 years? Truly, walk me through it, day by day, and tell me it feels whole and unbroken." The silence that followed stretched long and heavy, and Cale watched something crack open behind Mira's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or the first crack in a wall built specifically to keep certain memories locked far away. "I remember," she said slowly, "waking up in a camp. Rogue territory, somewhere in the eastern hills. I was told I had been found wandering, injured, with no memory of who I was, or where I came from. They gave me the name Mira, because I would not answer to anything else. That was 2 years ago. Before that, there is nothing. Just fog." 2 years, Cale repeated, his voice tight. "Not 3. "I do not know what happened during the missing year," Mira said, and for the first time, real fear crept into her tone, cutting through the guarded anger she had worn since the auction stage. "I have tried to remember. I have tried so many times. There is only fog and pain behind my eyes whenever I push too hard against it." Alara reached for Mira's hand, this time without hesitation, and Mira allowed it, too shaken to pull away. "Someone did this to you," Alara said gently. "This is not simple memory loss from injury. I have seen wounded minds heal crooked before, but never this cleanly, never with such a precise year missing, and nothing before it. This has the mark of forced suppression, old magic, or old poison, meant to erase what someone did not want remembered." "Who would do that to me?" Mira whispered. "Why?" Cale crouched down in front of her chair, bringing himself level with her rather than towering over her, and spoke as gently as his rough voice allowed. "I intend to find out," he said. "Whoever staged your death and stole 3 years from your life will answer for it. I swear that to you, whether or not you ever remember me, whether or not you ever choose to trust me again." Mira looked at him for a long moment, torchlight flickering across the scar on her face, across eyes that held no memory of the wedding hall 2 floors below, no memory of vows exchanged, or a bond sealed beneath the full moon. But somewhere beneath the fear and the fog, something in her gaze softened, just slightly, just enough for Cale to notice. "I don't know you," she said quietly. "I don't know this place. I don't know if any of this is real, or another kind of trap." "I know," Cale said. "But I am asking you to stay long enough to find out, that is all. Nothing more." Outside the window, the moon hung low and full over the towers of Blackthorn, the same moon that had witnessed their bonding 3 years ago, silent and patient, waiting for the truth buried beneath 2 lost years to finally claw its way back into the light. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of Cale's chambers, and Mira woke with a start, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar softness of the bed beneath her and the absence of chains around her wrists. She sat up slowly, taking in the room properly for the first time. Rich tapestries hung along the stone walls, depicting a black wolf standing beneath a full moon. A fire had burned down to embers in the hearth. Someone, likely a servant, had left a simple meal on a small table near the window, along with a set of clean clothes folded neatly beside it. She had been given the bed. Cale, she remembered dimly through the exhaustion of the night before, had insisted on taking a chair by the fire instead, refusing to leave her alone in an unfamiliar castle even for a few hours. He was gone now, the chair empty, the room quiet, except for the distant sound of activity somewhere below. Mira rose and moved to the window, looking down at the courtyard where she had stood the night before, feeling like a stranger in a story that supposedly belonged to her. Guards moved about their duties below, and further out, she could see training grounds where a group of young pack members practiced sparring under the watchful eye of an older instructor. A knock sounded at the door, and Alara entered without waiting for a response, carrying a small wooden tray with cups of tea. "You're awake," the healer said, setting the tray down. "Good. I feared the night's revelations might keep you from resting at all." "I barely slept," Mira admitted. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw fragments, faces I don't recognize. A room that looked like this one, but different somehow, younger." Alara's eyes sharpened with interest. "Tell me more. Every detail matters." Mira frowned, trying to hold on to the wisps of memory before they slipped away entirely. "There was a woman with silver hair, much like yours, standing beside me in a long blue dress, and a man's voice, saying words I couldn't understand, something about bonds and moons and forever." "That is the bonding ceremony," Alara said quietly. "You are remembering the day you became Cale's mate." A chill ran down Mira's spine, not entirely unpleasant, though the strangeness of it left her unsettled. Why would fragments return now, after 2 years of nothing? "Proximity, perhaps," Alara said, considering. "Or perhaps being near him again is loosening whatever bindings were placed on your mind. Suppression magic is not infinite. Given enough time and the right conditions, it can weaken, especially near the person your bond is tied to." Mira wrapped her hands around the warm cup of tea, grateful for something solid to hold on to. "And if it doesn't weaken enough? If I never remember any of it fully? Then we will find another way to uncover the truth," Alara said firmly. "Memory is not the only path to it. There are records, witnesses, evidence from that night 3 years ago that has never been properly examined, not since everyone believed you already dead." A knock interrupted them again, softer this time, and Cale stepped inside at Alara's invitation. He had changed from the plain gray coat of the night before into simpler pack attire, though the weight of sleeplessness still shadowed his eyes. "I did not mean to intrude," he said, glancing between the 2 women. "I only wished to see that you had rested well." "As well as anyone could, given the circumstances," Mira said, though there was less bite in her tone than there had been the night before. Alara rose, gathering the empty tray. "I will leave the 2 of you to speak. Lyra, if any more memories surface, however small, come find me immediately." Mira did not correct the name this time, though she noticed the slip and felt something strange twist in her chest at the sound of it, familiar in a way she could not explain. Once Alara had gone, an uneasy silence settled over the room. Cale remained near the door, giving her space, careful not to crowd her the way he clearly wanted to. "You said last night you would explain everything," Mira said. "I want to hear it, all of it, not softened for my comfort." Cale nodded and moved to sit in the chair, across from where she stood by the window, close enough to speak quietly, but far enough to respect the distance she still needed. "3 years ago," he began, "there was a raid on a border village within our territory. The attack was blamed on a rival pack, one we had old tensions with. When our forces arrived, the village had already burned. We found no survivors among those who had been sheltering there for the night, including, we believed, you. But there was no body," Mira said slowly. piecing it together from what Ilara had mentioned. Only the cloak. Only the cloak, Cale confirmed, his jaw tightening at the memory. We searched for days, weeks. I refused to believe you were gone until the evidence became impossible to argue against. Eventually, I accepted what everyone told me was true, and the pack held a mourning ceremony in your honor. And the rival pack you blamed? Did they ever answer for it? That is the question that has haunted me since last night, Cale admitted. Because if you were taken instead of killed, if you spent the last year in the hands of whoever staged that raid, before ending up wandering the eastern hills with no memory, then the story we were told 3 years ago was a lie from the very beginning. Mira turned this over carefully. Someone wanted everyone to believe I was dead, including me, eventually, once my memory was gone. Why go to such lengths? What could I possibly have known or represented that made me worth that much trouble? I have asked myself that same question every hour since I caught your scent in that auction hall, Cale said. I do not have an answer yet, but I intend to find one, and I would like your help doing it, if you are willing to give it. Mira studied him for a long moment. There was an intensity in his gaze that unsettled her, not from threat, but from the sheer weight of feeling behind it, feeling she could not return in kind because she did not remember him, not really, only fragments, and a scent that some deep instinctive part of her recognized as safe. I don't trust easily anymore, she said honestly. The last 2 years taught me not to. But I want the truth as much as you seem to. Maybe more, since it's my life that's been stolen from me. Then we want the same thing, Cale said. That is enough to start with. A commotion rose from somewhere outside the door, voices raised in argument. One of them Draven's, sharp and insistent. Cale rose immediately, crossing to open the door before whoever stood on the other side could knock. Draven stood in the hallway, flanked by an older man Mira did not recognize, silver-haired and stern-faced, wearing robes marked with the same black wolf crest that hung throughout the castle. Garrick insisted on seeing you immediately, Draven said, an apologetic edge to his voice. I told him it could wait. It cannot wait, Garrick said, pushing past Draven into the doorway, his sharp eyes landing immediately on Mira across the room. Not when the entire stronghold is whispering about a masked stranger the king brought home in the middle of the night. Not when I hear rumors that this stranger is being called by a dead woman's name. Garrick, Cale said, a warning edge sharpening his tone. This is not the time. With respect, my king, Garrick said, though his tone carried little of it. There is no better time. The council has spent 3 years helping you accept your loss and move forward for the sake of this pack's future. If you intend to upend that grief with the sudden reappearance of a woman none of us can verify, then the council deserves to know before rumor spreads further than truth can catch it. Mira felt the weight of the older man's gaze settle over her, cold and calculating, assessing her the way a merchant might assess a suspicious piece of merchandise. I am not asking the council's permission, Cale said flatly. I am informing you, as a courtesy, that Lyra may be alive, and that I intend to uncover the truth of what happened to her 3 years ago, regardless of how inconvenient that truth proves to be for anyone in this stronghold. Garrick's eyes narrowed, something calculating passing behind them, before he masked it with practiced neutrality. Of course, my king. I only wish to protect the stability you have worked so hard to rebuild. I would hate to see it undone by false hope, or worse, by deception dressed up in a familiar face. The words were aimed at her, Mira realized. A thinly veiled accusation, delivered under the guise of concern. She lifted her chin, refusing to shrink under his scrutiny, despite the unease curling in her stomach. If you have questions for me, she said evenly, you may ask them directly, rather than speaking about me as though I am not standing in the room. Something flickered across Garrick's face, surprise perhaps, or irritation at being challenged so plainly. Forgive me. It has simply been a difficult morning for all of us, adjusting to unexpected news. Difficult for all of us, Cale repeated, an edge of warning in his tone that made Garrick take an involuntary step back toward the door. I will call a council meeting once I have gathered proper information, Garrick. Until then, I expect discretion from every member, yourself included. Garrick bowed stiffly and retreated, Draven following him out with a final apologetic glance back at Cale, before pulling the door shut behind them. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, charged with something new. Mira wrapped her arms around herself, unsettled by the older man's scrutiny, in a way she could not fully name. "He does not trust me," she said. "He does not trust anything he cannot control," Cale replied, frustration evident beneath his controlled exterior. "Do not let his suspicion weigh on you. I will handle the council." "And if he is right to be suspicious?" Mira asked quietly. "You do not truly know who I have become in the years I cannot remember." "Neither do I." Cale crossed the room and stopped just short of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, far enough to respect the boundary she had drawn without words. "I know your scent," he said quietly. "I know it does not lie, whatever else may have changed. And I intend to prove that to everyone in this stronghold, including you, no matter how long it takes." Outside, the sound of the training yard drifted faintly through the window, sharp commands and the clash of practice weapons marking the ordinary rhythm of a pack that had no idea its foundation had just quietly begun to shift beneath its feet. By midday, word of the masked woman's arrival had spread through Blackthorn's stronghold like wind through dry grass. Servants whispered in corners. Guards exchanged glances when Mira passed through the halls at Cale's side. She felt every eye on her, every unspoken question pressing against her skin, and found herself grateful when Cale suggested they retreat to the archive room, away from prying stares. The archive was a long, narrow chamber lined floor to ceiling, with shelves of old records, ledgers, and maps. Dust motes drifted through the thin light filtering in from a high window. A single wooden table sat in the center, stacked with the reports Cale had ordered pulled from storage that morning, everything related to the raid 3 years prior. "These are the accounts gathered after the attack," Cale said, spreading the pages across the table. "Witness statements, damage assessments, and the report claiming the rival Duskwood pack was responsible." Mira ran her fingers over the edge of one yellowed page, a strange unease prickling at the back of her neck. "Why does this feel familiar to me? I have never seen these papers before." "Perhaps your body remembers, even if your mind does not," Cale said quietly. She picked up the top report and scanned it, frowning as she read. "This says the attack happened at dusk, and that survivors identified members of Duskwood by their markings. But if that's true, why would Duskwood need to keep me alive afterward, only to sell me at auction 2 years later? Rival packs do not typically ransom or sell their enemies quietly. They make examples of them." Cale straightened, considering her words carefully. "You are right. That detail never sat well with me either, not until now. Rival packs claim victories loudly. They do not hide captives for years, and then quietly release them into rogue territory, with no memory of their identity." "Someone wanted it to look like Duskwood," Mira said slowly, the pieces settling into place with unsettling clarity. "Which means someone within your own pack may have orchestrated the entire raid, and simply blamed the nearest rival to cover their tracks." The suggestion hung heavy in the dusty air between them. Cale's jaw tightened, and for a moment, old grief and new fury warred plainly across his face. "If that is true," he said, "then whoever did this has spent 3 years walking these halls, accepting my trust, offering condolences at your mourning ceremony, while knowing exactly what became of you." A knock sounded at the archive door, before either of them could say more. Draven entered, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes flicked toward the scattered reports on the table with obvious interest. "You asked me to bring word if anything unusual surfaced regarding Duskwood," Draven said. "I checked the old Border Patrol logs from the week of the raid, as you requested this morning. There is a gap. 3 days of missing entries right before the attack. Then the logs resume, as though nothing unusual occurred." "Missing entries," Cale repeated. "Who was responsible for those patrols?" Draven hesitated, a flicker of discomfort crossing his features. The logs from that week were kept by Corwin. He was newer to border duty then, promoted not long before the raid happened. Cale's brow furrowed. "Corwin has served this pack faithfully for years since. I have never had reason to question his loyalty." "Nor have I," Draven said carefully, "until I noticed the gap. It may be nothing. Records go missing sometimes through simple carelessness. But given everything else surfacing today, I thought you should know." Mira watched the exchange closely, noting the tension that flickered briefly across Draven's face whenever Corwin's name was mentioned. It was subtle, easily missed by anyone not paying close attention, but she had spent 2 years among rogues, learning to read the smallest shifts in expression that separated truth from deception. Survival had demanded it of her. You do not fully trust him either, she said once Draven had excused himself to continue his search through the remaining logs. Cale glanced at her, surprised by the observation. What makes you say that? The way his voice changed when he said Corwin's name. Careful. Measured. Like a man choosing his words to avoid saying something he isn't certain of yet. You read people well, Cale said, something like admiration threading through his tone. That is not a skill easily taught. It's a skill you learn quickly when your survival depends on knowing who intends to hurt you before they act, Mira said quietly, and something dark passed behind her eyes, a shadow of whatever the missing year had held that she still could not fully name. Cale's expression softened, the fury from moments before, giving way to something gentler, more protective. No one will hurt you here, not while I still draw breath. You keep making promises like that, Mira said, as though certainty is something you can simply choose to have. I choose it because the alternative is unbearable, he said simply. I lost you once already. I refuse to lose you again, whatever shape that means going forward, whether you remember our bond fully or never do at all. The honesty in his voice startled her, cutting through the careful walls she had built around herself since waking in that rogue camp with no memory and no name of her own. She looked away first, unsettled by the intensity of feeling directed toward her from a man whose face she recognized only in fragmented flashes, whose life had been so thoroughly intertwined with hers that an entire pack still whispered her name in the halls. I need air, she said abruptly, moving toward the archive door. Cale did not follow immediately, giving her the space she needed, though she felt his eyes on her back the entire way out. The training yard sat mostly empty at this hour, the earlier group of young pack members having dispersed for midday meals. Mira walked along the edge of the yard, breathing in the crisp afternoon air, trying to settle the storm of thoughts crowding her mind. A flicker of movement at the corner of her vision made her turn, and she found herself face to face with a young woman carrying a basket of linens, who stopped abruptly at the sight of her, eyes widening. You're her, the young woman breathed, the king's mate. Everyone's saying you came back. I don't know what I am, Mira admitted, surprising herself with the honesty of the answer. Not yet. The young woman studied her for a long moment, something softening in her expression. I remember you, a little. I was just a girl when you used to visit the healer's quarters, bringing extra bread for those of us training as apprentices. You always asked our names, even the youngest of us. Most high-born mates never bothered. Something tightened in Mira's throat at the words, a stranger's memory of a version of herself she could not access. What was my name to you? Back then? Lyra, the young woman said simply. Just Lyra. Never anything grander than that, though you could have demanded it. The name settled over Mira differently this time, spoken not by Alara or Cale, with the weight of expectation behind it, but by a stranger recalling a simple kindness from years ago. It felt less like an accusation and more like an offering, a small piece of a life she might, eventually, choose to reclaim. Thank you, Mira said quietly, for telling me that. The young woman smiled shyly and continued on her way, leaving Mira standing alone in the training yard, with the weight of a name that no longer felt entirely foreign, settling gently against her chest. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of the stronghold around her, stone and wood smoke and distant pine from the forest beyond the walls, and beneath it all, faintly, the lingering trace of Cale's scent from where he had stood beside her in the archive room. A flash struck behind her eyes without warning, sharp and vivid. A garden somewhere within these walls, moonlight silvering rows of flowers, and Cale's voice, younger, softer, laughing at something she could not quite hear. Her own laughter answering his, easy and unguarded in a way that felt impossibly distant from the woman she had become. The vision faded as quickly as it arrived, leaving her breathless and disoriented, one hand pressed against the cold stone wall beside her for balance. Whatever had been taken from her, whatever fog still clouded the year she could not account for, something was shifting, loosening, exactly as Alara had predicted. The walls built around her missing memories were not as solid as whoever built them had intended. And somewhere within that crumbling fog, Mira suspected, waited the answer to who had truly wanted Lyra Ashbourne gone, and why they had gone to such extraordinary lengths to make certain she never found her way home again. The council chamber sat at the heart of Blackthorn's stronghold, A circular room, ringed with tall windows and a long table carved from dark oak, worn smooth by generations of pack leaders before Cale. By evening, every council member had gathered at his summons, their expressions ranging from curiosity to poorly disguised suspicion. Mira stood just behind Cale's chair, close enough to be present, far enough to avoid feeling like an exhibit on display for the assembled leaders. Garrick sat near the far end of the table, his sharp eyes flicking toward her every few moments, while Draven remained near the door, arms crossed, watching the room with quiet vigilance. A third figure caught Mira's attention as she scanned the gathered council. A broad-shouldered man with close-cropped hair and calm, watchful eyes, seated a few chairs down from Garrick. When Cale introduced him briefly as Corwin, the Border Patrol officer whose logs had gone missing during the week of the raid, something in Mira's chest tightened, though she could not immediately say why. "I have called this meeting," Cale began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber, "to inform the council formally that the woman standing beside me is Lyra, my mate, believed dead for the past 3 years. New evidence suggests her death was staged, and that the raid blamed on Duskwood may not have been what it appeared." Murmurs rippled around the table. Garrick leaned forward first, as expected. "My king, with respect, staged evidence and missing memories make for a compelling story, but they are not proof. Duskwood's markings were identified by 3 separate witnesses that night. Are we now meant to believe all 3 were mistaken, or worse, complicit in a lie?" "I am not asking anyone to believe anything blindly," Cale replied evenly. "I am informing the council that an investigation is underway, and I expect full cooperation from every member present, without exception." Corwin shifted slightly in his seat, and Mira's eyes drifted toward him again, drawn by some instinct she could not name. He caught her gaze and offered a polite, measured nod, nothing overtly suspicious in the gesture. Yet something about the stillness of his expression struck her as deliberately controlled, the way a man might hold his face carefully, when he had much to hide. "The border logs from that week," Cale continued, "were found to be incomplete. Corwin, as the officer responsible for those patrols at the time, I would like to hear your account of what occurred during those missing days." All eyes turned toward Corwin, and Mira watched closely as he straightened in his seat, expression settling into practiced calm. "I remember little of specific note from that week, my king," Corwin said. "It was early in my patrol duties, and record-keeping was not yet a strength of mine. I take responsibility for the gap, though I assure you it was carelessness, not concealment." "Careless enough to lose 3 full days of entries during the exact week of the raid," Cale said, "and not before or after." "Coincidences occur even in matters this grave," Corwin replied smoothly. "I wish I could offer more, my king, but I have no memory of anything unusual during that time." Garrick cleared his throat before Cale could press further. Perhaps, rather than interrogating loyal officers based on old paperwork, the council's time would be better spent verifying the identity of this woman properly, through proper channels, before further destabilizing this pack with unproven claims. "I have already confirmed her identity," Alara interjected sharply from her seat near the window. "I examined her myself. The scar aside, her face, her scent, and now emerging memories all confirm what I have said since last night. This is Lyra. Memories that conveniently surface only after being told what to remember," Garrick countered. "Forgive my caution, healer, but suggestion is a powerful thing, particularly to a mind already fractured by trauma." Mira felt heat rise in her chest at the implication, the suggestion that her own memories, however fragmented, could be dismissed as manufactured suggestion, rather than truth clawing its way back to the surface. She stepped forward before she could stop herself, drawing every eye in the chamber toward her. "I did not ask to be told any of this," she said, voice steady, despite the anger simmering beneath it. "I did not ask to wake up in a rogue camp with no memory of who I was, and I certainly did not ask to be paraded onto an auction stage and sold to the highest bidder like livestock. Whatever doubts this council holds about me, I assure you, I hold them tenfold about myself. I do not know yet what I remember, and what I do not. But I know I was taken from somewhere, kept from returning here for 2 years at the very least, and someone in this pack may know exactly why." Silence settled over the chamber, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire, burning in the hearth along the far wall. Garrick's expression flickered, something like genuine surprise passing behind his sharp eyes, though he recovered quickly, folding his hands atop the table. Well spoken, he said, tone carefully neutral now. I withdraw nothing of my caution, but I will grant that your words carry conviction. Cale's gaze met Mira's briefly, something like pride flickering behind his eyes despite the tension of the room, and she felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest at the silent acknowledgement. The investigation will continue, Cale said, addressing the full council once more. Corwin, I expect you to submit to further questioning as new evidence emerges. Garrick, your caution is noted, and will be considered, but it will not halt the pursuit of truth in this matter. This council is dismissed. Chairs scraped against stone as the council members rose, murmuring quietly among themselves as they filed out of the chamber. Corwin lingered a moment longer than the others, his gaze sweeping once more toward Mira, before he offered a final, unreadable nod, and departed. Once the chamber emptied, leaving only Cale, Mira, Draven, and Ilara, the tension in the room eased slightly, though it did not disappear entirely. Corwin is hiding something, Draven said quietly, once the door had closed behind the last departing council member. I have known him for years, and I have never seen him choose his words so carefully. Careful words do not prove guilt, Cale said, though his tone carried little conviction behind the caution. But they warrant closer attention. Draven, I want you watching him discreetly. Do not confront him directly, not yet. If he is involved, I want to understand the full scope of it before he has reason to run. Draven nodded and slipped out of the chamber to begin his quiet surveillance, leaving Cale, Mira, and Ilara alone in the flickering firelight. You spoke well tonight, Ilara said to Mira, warmth softening her weathered features. Braver than most who find themselves suddenly thrust before this council. I only said what felt true, Mira replied, though the praise settled something unsteady in her chest. Ilara excused herself shortly after, leaving Cale and Mira alone in the wide, quiet chamber. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows across the stone floor, and for a moment neither spoke, the weight of the evening settling comfortably between them, rather than pressing uncomfortably as it once might have. Thank you, Cale said eventually, for defending yourself so clearly. I know none of this is easy. Being paraded before strangers who question your very identity. It wasn't for you, Mira said, though not unkindly. It was for myself. I am tired of being spoken about as though I have no voice of my own. That sounds like something Lyra would say, Cale said, a small, unguarded smile touching his mouth for the first time since she had met him. Mira felt an answering warmth stir in her chest, unexpected and unwelcome in its familiarity, as though some deeply buried part of her recognized the shape of that smile and reached toward it instinctively. Tell me about her, she said quietly, surprising herself with the request. Not the mate bond, not the ceremony. Just her, who she was, before all of this. Cale's expression softened further, memory flickering warm behind his eyes. She was stubborn beyond reason, and twice as clever as she believed anyone else realized. She argued with my counsel more than any advisor dared. She insisted on learning every guard's name within her first month here, much to Garrick's endless irritation. She laughed easily, and rarely at anything expected. Mira found herself leaning closer without meaning to, drawn by the warmth in his voice, by the vivid shape of a woman she was slowly beginning to recognize as something closer to herself than a stranger's memory. She sounds like someone I would like to know, Mira admitted softly. She sounds like you, Cale said, just as softly. Even now, even with 2 years stolen from your memory, the core of her, of you, has not gone anywhere. I see her in the way you refused to back down before Garrick tonight. I see her in the way you spoke of survival, with such quiet ferocity. The fire popped softly in the silence that followed, and Mira found herself studying his face in the warm light, searching for something she could not quite name, some anchor point between the stranger she had become and the woman she was slowly, unwillingly, beginning to believe she once had been. I am not ready to be her again, she admitted quietly. Not fully, not yet. I am not asking you to be, Cale said. I am only asking you to let yourself become whoever you are now, without fear that doing so dishonors who you were before. Whatever shape that takes, I intend to stand beside you through it, exactly as I promised. For the first time since waking in Blackthorn's stronghold, Mira did not feel the urge to pull away from the warmth radiating steadily from the man beside her. Something had shifted quietly in the chamber tonight. Some old thread of connection tugging gently back into place, undeniable even to a mind still shrouded in fog. Whatever truth waited to be uncovered about Corwin, about the missing days in the patrol logs, about the true architect behind the raid that had stolen 3 years of her life, Mira found herself, for the first time, genuinely willing to fight for the answer, not merely to reclaim a past she barely remembered, but to protect a future she was only beginning to believe she deserved. 3 days passed in careful, watchful silence. Draven trailed Corwin's movements from a discreet distance, noting every meeting, every hushed conversation exchanged near the eastern gate, where border patrols came and went. Mira, meanwhile, spent her mornings with Elara, working through gentle exercises meant to coax more of her buried memories toward the surface, and her afternoons in the archive room with Kale, poring over old reports and border maps in search of anything overlooked in the initial investigation 3 years ago. It was on the 4th morning that Draven arrived at Kale's chambers before dawn, his expression grim, urgency sharpening every line of his face. Corwin met with someone outside the walls last night, Draven said without preamble, as Kale and Mira both turned toward him. A stranger, cloaked, waiting near the old mill ruins past the eastern boundary. I could not hear their conversation, but I recognized the tension in Corwin's posture. Whatever was discussed, it left him rattled. "Did you see the stranger's face?" Kale asked. "No," Draven admitted. The hood stayed raised the entire time, but before they parted, I saw the stranger hand Corwin something small, wrapped in cloth. Corwin tucked it into his coat and returned to the stronghold immediately after. Mira felt her pulse quicken, some instinct sharpening at the description, though she could not place why. "What time did this happen?" "Just past midnight," Draven said. The number struck something loose in her mind, a fragment surfacing unbidden. Midnight, cloaked figures near old ruins. A memory, faint and distorted, of standing in similar shadows once before, though whether it belonged to this life or the fog of her missing year, she could not yet tell. "I need to see those ruins," Mira said suddenly. Kale frowned. "It may not be safe. If Corwin or his contact returns and finds you there, we cannot be certain what they might do." "I need to see them regardless," Mira insisted. "Something about what Draven described feels familiar. I do not know why yet, but if there is any chance of remembering something useful, I have to try." After a tense discussion, Kale reluctantly agreed, on the condition that both he and Draven accompany her, and that they wait until full daylight to minimize risk of encountering anyone still lingering near the ruins. The old mill sat crumbling at the edge of a shallow ravine, its wooden beams long rotted, stone walls half swallowed by creeping ivy. Mira walked slowly through the ruins, trailing her fingers along the cool stone, waiting for something, anything, to click into place. It came suddenly, sharp and disorienting, stealing the breath from her lungs. She staggered slightly, one hand flying to the nearest wall for support. "Mira?" Kale's voice cut through the haze, alarm sharpening his tone as he moved quickly to her side. "I have been here before," she said, voice trembling. "Not recently. Before. During the missing year. I remember cold stone beneath me, and voices arguing above, deciding what to do with me. One voice said I was too valuable to kill outright. Another argued I was too dangerous to keep alive, that my knowledge could unravel everything they had built." "What knowledge?" Kale asked urgently. Mira pressed her palm against her temple, chasing the fraying edges of the memory before it slipped away entirely. "I don't know, it's gone again, but I know I was afraid. I know I begged them to let me go, and one voice, calmer than the others, said erasing my memory would serve their purposes just as well as ending my life, with far less risk of drawing attention to what they had done." Kale's hands settled gently on her shoulders, steadying her as the color slowly returned to her face. "That confirms what we suspected. Someone deliberately chose to erase your memory, rather than kill you outright. Which means whoever ordered it believed you knew something dangerous enough to threaten them, yet valuable enough that they hesitated to simply end your life. Dangerous knowledge," Draven repeated slowly, scanning the ruins around them with narrowed eyes. "What would a mated Omega know that could threaten anyone within this pack, enough to risk staging an entire raid?" Mira's gaze drifted toward the crumbling stone walls, another fragment surfacing, hazier than the last but no less unsettling. I remember paperwork. Ledgers, similar to the ones in your archive. Numbers that did not match what they should have. I think I found something, before the raid. Some discrepancy in trade records, or supply counts. Something that should not have existed. Cale's expression sharpened with sudden understanding. The southern trade route. There were irregularities reported around that same time. 3 years ago, though we attributed them to simple miscounting during a difficult season. If you discovered evidence of deliberate fraud within the Pax trade dealings, and confronted the wrong person about it, they would have every reason to want me silenced, Mira finished quietly. Not killed outright, in case questions arose about my sudden death without cause, but removed quietly enough that grief could explain away my absence instead. The pieces settled together with unsettling clarity, though large gaps remained, entire threads of the conspiracy still tangled beyond her reach. Draven paced slowly along the ravine's edge, deep in thought. If Corwin is involved, he said, he is unlikely to be the one who orchestrated all of this alone. He was too junior 3 years ago to have access to trade ledgers or the authority to stage a raid of that scale. He may simply be a messenger, carrying instructions between whoever truly planned this and whoever else remains involved within the stronghold. Then we need to know who he answers to, Cale said. Watching him alone will not lead us to the architect behind all of this. We need to intercept whatever message passed between him and that cloaked stranger last night, before it reaches its intended recipient. As if summoned by the very mention of him, a distant figure appeared at the edge of the ravine, moving briskly along the path back toward the stronghold. Corwin, unaware of their presence among the ruins, cast one final glance over his shoulder toward the mill, before disappearing beyond a bend in the trail. He's returning to check something, Draven murmured, perhaps to retrieve whatever he left here, or to meet his contact again in daylight. Cale's eyes narrowed with sharp resolve. Then we follow him, carefully, and we do not let him notice he is being watched. They trailed Corwin at a careful distance through the winding forest path back toward Blackthorn, and Mira found her heart pounding steadily faster with every step, some deep instinct warning her that whatever answers waited at the end of this path would finally crack open the truth buried beneath 3 years of grief, deception, and a memory stolen to protect secrets someone within these very walls had killed, or nearly killed, to keep hidden. The forest thinned as they neared the stronghold's outer wall, and Corwin slipped through a side gate reserved for border patrol officers, disappearing from sight into the maze of inner courtyards beyond. We lost him, Draven said, frustration evident in his tightened jaw. Not entirely, Cale said, already moving toward the same gate with quiet, purposeful strides. I know exactly where border officers store their personal effects. If he retrieved something from those ruins, he will need somewhere secure to keep it, until his next meeting with whoever waits beyond these walls. Mira followed close behind, adrenaline sharpening every sense, the fog of her missing memories thinning further with each step closer to whatever truth waited at the heart of this unraveling conspiracy. Whoever had ordered her silence 3 years ago remained hidden still, cloaked in shadows and careful deniability, but for the first time since waking in that rogue camp with no name and no memory, Mira felt something solid taking shape beneath her uncertainty. She was close. Closer than she had ever been to understanding exactly what had been stolen from her, and exactly who intended to keep it buried forever. The border officers' quarters sat along the western edge of the stronghold, a low stone building with narrow windows and simple wooden doors marking each private room. Cale moved through the corridor with quiet authority, nodding briefly to a young guard stationed near the entrance, who straightened immediately at the sight of his king and made no move to question his presence. Corwin's room is the third door, Cale murmured, leading Mira and Draven down the narrow hallway. As king, I have every right to inspect any quarters within this stronghold. If he has hidden something incriminating here, we will find it. The door was unlocked, and Cale pushed it open without hesitation. Inside, the room was sparse and orderly, a narrow bed against one wall, a small writing desk beneath the window, and a wooden chest tucked into the corner. Draven moved immediately to the desk, sifting carefully through neatly stacked papers, while Cale knelt before the wooden chest, testing its lid and finding it unlocked. Mira stood near the doorway, watching the search with growing unease, some instinct prickling at the back of her neck, though she could not immediately place its source. Nothing unusual here, Draven said after a moment, setting the papers back exactly as he had found them. Standard patrol schedules, supply requests, nothing incriminating. Cale lifted the lid of the wooden chest, revealing folded uniforms and a few personal effects. He sifted through carefully, and near the bottom, his fingers brushed against something wrapped in cloth, tucked beneath a spare cloak. "Here," he said, drawing it out carefully. The cloth unwrapped to reveal a small, sealed letter, along with a single silver coin bearing an unfamiliar crest. Neither the Black Wolf of Blackthorn nor the markings of Duskwood Pack. Mira stepped closer, studying the crest with a frown. "I do not recognize this mark." "Nor do I," Cale admitted, turning the coin over in his palm. "It is not affiliated with any pack I know of within our territory." Draven took the sealed letter carefully, breaking the wax seal with practiced ease. He scanned the contents quickly, his expression darkening with every line. "It's coded," Draven said. "Numbers and symbols, no plain words. But this crest, the same one on the coin, appears 3 times throughout the letter." Before Cale could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed sharply from the corridor outside, followed by the door swinging open to reveal Corwin himself, freezing in the doorway at the sight of them standing in his quarters. For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. Corwin's gaze moved from Cale, to the open chest, to the letter and coin in Draven's hands, and something in his expression shifted from surprise to resigned understanding. "I suppose there is no point pretending confusion," Corwin said quietly, closing the door behind him with deliberate calm. "Start talking," Cale said, voice low and dangerous. "Who gave you this letter? Whose crest is this?" Corwin's shoulders sagged slightly, the careful composure he had maintained before the council, finally cracking under the weight of discovery. "I did not orchestrate the raid 3 years ago, my king. I swear that to you. I was young, ambitious, and foolish enough to accept payment for looking the other way during my patrol shift that week, no more than that. I did not know at the time what the payment was buying, only that someone wanted the border unwatched for 3 specific nights." "Who paid you?" Cale demanded. "I never met them directly," Corwin said. "Only their messenger, a woman who approached me quietly one evening, with more silver than I had ever seen, in exchange for a few nights of convenient blindness. I told myself it was harmless, smuggling perhaps, or minor trade avoiding tariffs. I did not learn the truth of what occurred until well after the raid, and by then, admitting my involvement would have cost me everything, perhaps my life." "And the letter you received last night?" Draven pressed, holding up the coded pages. "The stranger at the mill ruins?" Corwin's eyes flicked toward Mira, something like guilt flashing behind them. "The same messenger, returned after years of silence, warning me that questions were being asked again, now that Lyra has resurfaced. She instructed me to maintain my silence, and to report immediately if the investigation drew closer to uncovering the truth." "Report to whom?" Cale's voice had gone dangerously quiet now, the fury beneath it barely restrained. "I do not know their name," Corwin said. "I swear it." The messenger never revealed who commanded her, only that the silver came from someone highly placed within this very stronghold, someone with enough influence to ensure the raid's cover story held for 3 years without question. Mira stepped forward, memory sharpening unexpectedly at his words. "The crest," she said suddenly. "I have seen it before. Not recently. In the fog of the missing year." All eyes turned toward her, as she stared at the coin still resting in Cale's palm, the unfamiliar symbol, tugging at something buried deep in her mind. "It was on a ring," she said slowly, the memory surfacing in fragmented pieces. "A signet ring, worn by someone who visited wherever I was being held during that missing year. I remember firelight catching the metal, the same crest, though I could not see the wearer's face clearly." "Could you describe anything else?" Cale asked urgently. "Their voice, their build, anything at all?" Mira closed her eyes, chasing the fragile edges of the memory, before it dissolved entirely. Older, a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question, and a particular way of clearing his throat before speaking, as though perpetually irritated by having to explain himself to lesser minds. The description settled over the room with unsettling familiarity, and Mira watched Cale's expression shift, understanding dawning slow and horrible across his features. "Garrick," he said quietly. "You cannot be certain," Draven said, though his tone carried little conviction behind the caution. Many older men within this pack share similar mannerisms. Not many older men within this pack, Cale said grimly, sat before this very council 3 days ago, questioning Mira's identity with suspicious fervor, and pressing hardest against any investigation that might uncover the truth of what happened 3 years ago. Corwin paled visibly at the direction the conversation had taken. I never confirmed the messenger's employer, my king. I only suspected, based on the resources involved, that it belonged to someone with significant standing. I did not dare investigate further, for fear of what I might find, and what it might cost me to know it. Cale turned the silver coin over once more in his palm, the unfamiliar crest catching the dim light of the room. If Garrick orchestrated this, if he staged a raid, silenced my mate for 2 years, and allowed his own council seat to remain unquestioned throughout this entire investigation, then he has been walking these halls for 3 years, offering condolences at Mira's mourning ceremony, all while knowing precisely what he had done. The weight of the realization settled heavy over the small room, fury and betrayal tangled together behind Cale's carefully controlled expression. We cannot confront him without solid proof, Draven cautioned. If he suspects we know, he may flee, or worse, silence Corwin permanently, to erase the last remaining witness against him. Then we move carefully, Cale said, resolve hardening in his voice. Corwin, you will continue exactly as before, revealing nothing of this discovery. If the messenger contacts you again, you will report to me immediately, and only me. Draven, I want quiet surveillance placed on Garrick starting tonight, discreet enough that he suspects nothing. And me? Mira asked. Cale turned toward her, something fierce and protective flickering behind his gaze. You will remain close to me, and you will trust no one within this stronghold beyond the 4 of us standing in this room, until we have gathered enough proof to bring Garrick before the full council, with undeniable evidence of his betrayal. Mira nodded slowly, the fragile fragment of memory still echoing faintly in her mind, a signet ring catching firelight, a voice accustomed to obedience, and the crushing weight of understanding that the man who had questioned her identity most fiercely before the entire council had likely been the very architect of everything stolen from her 3 years ago. Whatever remained of the fog clouding her missing year, Mira suspected the truth waited now, just beyond her reach, close enough to taste, close enough that Garrick himself, sensing the net tightening slowly around him, would soon be forced into a mistake that would finally reveal him for exactly what he was. For 2 days, Draven watched Garrick from careful, unseen distances, cataloging every meeting, every visitor to his private study, every unusual absence from his normal routine. Cale kept Mira close throughout, the 2 of them continuing to comb through old trade records in the archive room, searching now specifically for the discrepancies Mira's fragmented memory suggested she had uncovered 3 years ago. It was Alara who found the first solid thread, arriving breathless at the archive room, late on the 2nd afternoon, a heavy ledger clutched against her chest. I remembered something, she said, setting the ledger down on the table between them. 3 years ago, shortly before the raid, Lyra came to me privately, worried about something she had discovered in the Southern trade accounts. She asked me not to mention it to anyone, not even you, Cale, until she had gathered more proof. I assumed at the time it was a minor concern, easily resolved, and with everything that followed, I confess I forgot about it entirely until now. Cale took the ledger carefully, flipping through pages of careful handwriting, documenting supply counts and trade exchanges along the southern route. What did she tell you specifically? That the numbers reported to the council did not match what she observed personally during a visit to the southern storehouses, Alara said. Grain counts inflated on paper, silver payments recorded for goods that never arrived, discrepancies small enough to overlook individually, but substantial when added together over several seasons. Mira leaned over the ledger, scanning the neat columns of figures, something tugging faintly at the edges of her memory, though it refused to sharpen into anything solid. Whose signature approves these Southern trade reports? Alara turned to the final page of each quarterly report, revealing a familiar looping signature at the bottom of every entry. Garrick. He has overseen Southern trade accounts for over a decade, Cale said grimly, long before I ever ascended to lead this pack. No one ever thought to question his numbers, given his seniority and his standing among the council. Which means he has likely been skimming silver from this pack's trade dealings for years, Draven said. arriving just in time to catch the tail end of the conversation, closing the door quietly behind him. And when Lyra discovered the discrepancy and threatened to expose it, he could not risk the truth reaching the full council. So he staged an entire raid, Mira said quietly, the pieces settling together with sickening clarity, framed a rival pack to divert suspicion, and had me quietly removed, rather than killed outright, likely fearing that an outright death within pack borders would draw closer scrutiny than a raid attributed to outside enemies. And when your memory proved too dangerous to leave intact, Alara added softly, in case you ever found your way back, he ensured it was erased entirely, leaving you with no path back to the truth, and no way to threaten him again. The weight of the full conspiracy settled heavy over the room, 3 years of grief and deception finally crystallizing into a single damning portrait of betrayal from a man Cale had trusted as an advisor since childhood. I have something else, Draven said, drawing a folded paper from his coat. I followed Garrick to the southern storehouses this morning. He met briefly with a merchant I did not recognize, and afterward, I found this discarded near the loading dock, half burned in a small fire he apparently intended to fully destroy. He unfolded the singed paper carefully, revealing a partial ledger page, numbers and notations bearing the same unfamiliar crest that had marked the coin found in Corwin's quarters. He is still actively hiding evidence, Cale said, fury sharpening every word, which means he suspects the investigation is closing in, and he is growing careless in his haste to cover his tracks before we find enough proof to move against him. We need to move quickly then, Mira said, before he has the chance to destroy whatever remains, or worse, flee entirely and escape justice altogether. Cale's expression hardened with resolve. I will call an emergency council session tonight, with the ledger discrepancies, Corwin's testimony, the coin and coded letter, and this half-burned evidence Draven recovered. We have enough now to formally accuse him before the full council, where he cannot simply dismiss the claims as rumor or suspicion. He will deny everything, Draven warned. A man clever enough to hide fraud for over a decade will not confess simply because we present a stack of evidence against him. Then we let the evidence speak for itself, Cale said, and we ensure Corwin testifies directly before the council, under oath, regarding the silver payments and the messenger's identity. Mira felt her pulse quicken at the plan taking shape, equal parts anticipation and unease settling in her chest. What if he moves against Corwin first, to silence the one witness who can directly implicate him? I will have Corwin placed under discreet protection immediately, Cale said. Draven, arrange it quietly. I do not want Garrick aware that we suspect him until the moment he stands before the full council tonight, with no warning, and no time to prepare a counter to the evidence against him. As the plan solidified, Mira found herself staring down at the ledger once more, at the careful columns of numbers that had cost her 3 years of memory, and nearly her life. Somewhere beneath the fog still clouding parts of her mind, the woman who had first uncovered this discrepancy, who had cared enough about her pack's integrity to risk everything investigating it alone, felt closer now than she ever had before. I want to be there tonight, she said firmly. When he is confronted, I want him to see exactly who he failed to erase. Cale studied her for a long moment, something fierce and proud flickering behind his gaze. Then you shall stand beside me, exactly as you once did before all of this began. The afternoon stretched into evening as final preparations were made. Guards quietly positioned near the council chamber, Corwin sequestered under careful watch, and the gathered evidence organized methodically for presentation. Mira changed into simple, dignified attire, provided by Alara, the mask from the auction stage discarded entirely now, her scarred face bared openly for whatever confrontation awaited. As the sun sank low over Blackthorn's towers, casting long golden light across the courtyard, Mira felt the fragile threads of her missing memories pulling taut, straining toward the moment of reckoning that had been 3 long years in the making. Whatever remained of the fog clouding her past, whatever fragments still eluded her grasp, tonight promised to strip away the last of Garrick's careful deception, and with it, perhaps, the final barrier standing between Mira and the full truth of the woman she had been forced to forget. The council chamber filled quickly once word spread that Cale had called an emergency session, torches blazing along the stone walls, casting flickering light across the long oak table where every member took their seat with visible unease. Garrick arrived last, composed as ever, though Mira noted the slight tightness around his eyes as he took in the unusually solemn atmosphere of the room. Cale stood at the head of the table, Mira beside him, Draven and Alara positioned near the door, and Corwin seated quietly at the far end, flanked discreetly by two guards Cale trusted absolutely. "Thank you all for gathering on short notice," Cale began, his voice carrying easily through the tense silence. "I have called this session to present evidence regarding the true circumstances surrounding the raid 3 years ago, and Lyra's subsequent disappearance." Garrick's expression remained carefully neutral, though his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly against the edge of the table. "I trust this evidence is more substantial than fragmented memories and coincidental gaps in old patrol logs, my king." "Considerably more substantial," Cale said, nodding to Draven, who stepped forward and laid the half-burned ledger page, the sealed coin, and the coded letter on the table before the assembled council. A murmur rippled through the chamber as council members leaned forward, studying the unfamiliar crest marked across each item. "This crest," Cale continued, "was discovered in Corwin's quarters, delivered by a messenger who has contacted him twice now, most recently at the old mill ruins outside our eastern boundary. Corwin, would you share with the council what you have already confessed to me privately?" Corwin rose slowly, his voice steady despite the visible tremor in his hands. 3 years ago, I accepted payment to leave the border unwatched for 3 nights during the week of the raid. I did not know at the time what that silence would enable. I have since learned it allowed the staged attack on the border village to proceed without interference, and Lyra's capture to go unnoticed until it was far too late to intervene. Gasps and hushed exclamations rippled through the gathered council members. Garrick's expression had gone carefully, deliberately still, though Mira, watching closely, caught the faint tightening at the corner of his jaw. "Who paid you for this silence?" one council member demanded. "I never learned their name," Corwin admitted. "Only that the silver came from someone of significant standing within this very stronghold, delivered through an intermediary messenger who has recently returned, warning me to maintain my silence now that Lyra has resurfaced." Cale lifted the half-burned ledger page next, holding it up for the full council to see. "This was recovered near the southern storehouses 2 days ago, discarded and partially destroyed by someone attempting to erase evidence of long-standing fraud within our trade accounts. The discrepancies documented here match irregularities Lyra herself discovered 3 years ago, shortly before the raid that supposedly claimed her life." "And whose signature approves every quarterly report from the southern trade route?" Cale continued, turning slowly to face Garrick directly. "For well over a decade." The chamber fell utterly silent, every eye shifting toward Garrick, whose composure finally began to crack, a thin sheen of sweat visible along his brow, despite the cool evening air. "This is absurd," Garrick said, though his voice lacked its usual commanding confidence. "You accuse me based on a burned scrap of paper, and the confession of a border officer desperate to shift blame away from his own treachery?" "I accuse you," Cale said, voice hardening with barely restrained fury, "based on a decade of trade fraud, your own signature approved, evidence you yourself attempted to destroy 2 days ago, and a memory Lyra herself recovered, describing a signet ring bearing this exact crest, worn by the man who visited her during the year she was held captive, her memory deliberately erased to protect whoever had the most to lose from her survival." Mira stepped forward then, meeting Garrick's gaze directly for the first time since the confrontation began. "I remember firelight catching metal, a voice accustomed to obedience, a particular way of clearing your throat before speaking, as though perpetually irritated by explaining yourself to those you considered beneath you. I did not know your face then. I know it now." Garrick's composure shattered entirely at her words, something desperate and cornered flashing behind his eyes. "You remember nothing," he snapped. "Fragments and fantasy, conjured by a mind broken beyond repair, fed convenient suggestions by a king, desperate to believe his dead mate has somehow returned to him." "Careful, Garrick," Cale said, voice dropping dangerously low. "Every word you speak now only confirms what the evidence already suggests." Garrick's gaze swept the room, taking in the grim faces of the council members surrounding him, understanding dawning slowly that no amount of denial would salvage his position now. His shoulders sagged, the carefully maintained mask of righteous indignation crumbling into something colder, more calculating. "You have no true proof," he said quietly. "Only speculation, and a broken woman's fragmented dreams." "I have enough," Cale said. "Enough to formally strip you of your council seat, effective immediately, and enough to place you under guard, while a full investigation confirms every remaining detail of your betrayal. If the evidence proves as damning as I believe it will, you will answer for staging an attack that cost innocent lives in that border village, for the years you stole from Lyra's memory, and for over a decade of stolen silver meant for this pack's welfare." Garrick's eyes darted briefly toward the chamber door, some final desperate calculation flickering behind his gaze, but the guards positioned discreetly near the exit made any thought of flight immediately, visibly futile. "I built this pack's trade prosperity for over a decade," Garrick said, bitterness finally breaking through his careful composure. "I secured alliances, negotiated terms that kept this territory fed through 3 difficult winters. A small percentage skimmed from that success seemed a fair price for services rendered that none of you ever properly acknowledged." "And when Lyra discovered your theft," Cale said, "threatening to expose everything you had built through deception, you chose to stage the deaths of innocent villagers, frame a rival pack for the atrocity, and erase the memory of the woman I loved, rather than simply accept accountability for your own greed." "She would have destroyed everything," Garrick said, something almost pleading entering his tone now. "Years of careful work, unraveled by one stubborn Omega who could not simply mind her place, and trust that older, wiser minds understood the necessary costs of prosperity." "She was never meant to mind her place," Cale said, fury and protective fire blazing openly now behind his gaze. "She was meant to be exactly what she has proven herself to be, even now, memory stolen and all. Braver and more honest than every council member who allowed your deception to continue unquestioned for years, simply because your numbers looked convenient on paper." The guards moved forward at Cale's signal, flanking Garrick on either side. He did not resist, some final resignation settling over his features as the weight of exposure finally crushed the careful mask he had maintained for over a decade. As Garrick was led from the chamber, the remaining council members sat in stunned silence, the full weight of the betrayal settling slowly over the room. Mira remained standing beside Cale, watching the man who had orchestrated 3 years of grief and deception disappear beyond the chamber doors, and felt something loosen in her chest that she had not realized remained so tightly wound. It was not full closure. Questions remained about the messenger, about the extent of Garrick's reach beyond this single stronghold, about how much of her missing year would ever fully return to her memory. But the man responsible for the deepest wound of her life had finally been named, exposed, and stripped of the power he had wielded so carefully for so long. "It is done," Cale said quietly, turning to face her fully as the chamber slowly began to empty around them. "Or at least, the beginning of it is done. The rest, the full investigation, the reckoning for everything he has done, will take time." "I know," Mira said softly. "But for the first time since I woke in that rogue camp with no name of my own, I feel like I finally understand who took everything from me, and why." Cale reached for her hand, hesitant, giving her every opportunity to pull away, as she had so many times before. This time, she did not. Her fingers curled gently around his, and for a long, quiet moment, the two of them stood together, amid the emptying council chamber. 3 years of grief, and 2 years of stolen memory, finally beginning, slowly, to give way to something that almost resembled hope. The weeks that followed Garrick's exposure passed in a slow, steady unraveling of everything he had hidden for over a decade. Investigators combed through years of trade records, uncovering the full scope of his fraud. Silver quietly diverted through false accounts scattered across 3 different southern territories. The messenger who had delivered his instructions to Corwin was eventually traced to a small coastal settlement, where she confessed under careful questioning to acting as an intermediary for over 5 years, never once meeting Garrick directly, communicating only through coded letters and coin markers bearing his family's old, mostly forgotten crest. The full truth of the raid emerged gradually. Garrick had hired mercenaries posing as Duskwood raiders, paying handsomely to ensure the attack appeared convincingly like the work of a rival pack. Lyra, having confronted him privately about the trade discrepancies just days before, had been specifically targeted, taken alive rather than killed, held in a series of remote locations across the following year, while Garrick debated what to do with the dangerous knowledge she carried. When keeping her captive indefinitely became too great a risk, he had turned to a healer, sympathetic to his cause, one skilled in old suppression magic, paying for a ritual that stripped away her memory of the past year and released her into rogue territory, confident that a woman with no name and no memory posed no further threat to his carefully constructed deception. He had not anticipated her scent surviving the erasure of her memory. He had not anticipated Cale's wolf recognizing his mate across a crowded auction hall, undoing 3 years of careful deception in a single unguarded breath. Mira sat with Alara often during those weeks, working patiently through the remaining fog clouding her missing year, and slowly, painstakingly, more of the truth surfaced. She remembered confronting Garrick directly in his study, ledger in hand, demanding an explanation for the discrepancies she had found. She remembered the cold fear when his expression shifted from feigned concern to calculated calm. She remembered fragments of the following days, blurred and disjointed, culminating finally in the suppression ritual itself, a searing pain behind her eyes, and then nothing but fog for 2 long years afterward. With each returning memory, more of herself settled back into place, not as a stranger reclaiming a life she did not recognize, but as a woman, slowly recognizing herself within memories that had simply been waiting, patient and unbroken, beneath layers of forced silence. The scar along her temple remained, a permanent reminder of the price she had paid for uncovering a truth others had wanted buried. But she no longer flinched when Alara traced it gently during their sessions, no longer viewed it as evidence of a life stolen, but rather as proof of a woman who had refused to look away from wrongdoing, even when silence would have been so much safer. Cale remained a steady, patient presence throughout those weeks, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, allowing the mate bond between them to reawaken naturally, rather than forcing it back into the shape it had once held. Slowly, evenings spent reviewing council matters together turned into quiet dinners, shared without the weight of investigation hanging over them. Careful conversations turned into easy laughter, the kind Mira remembered faintly from the garden vision that had struck her weeks earlier. Moonlight silvering rows of flowers, unguarded joy finally beginning to feel less like a stranger's memory and more like her own. The pack, too, slowly came to accept her, not merely as the king's mate returned from apparent death, but as a woman who had endured captivity, memory loss, and public scrutiny, with a quiet, unshakable strength that earned genuine respect rather than mere sympathy. The young apprentice who had recognized her in the training yard weeks earlier became a frequent visitor, bringing news of pack gossip and small kindnesses that helped Mira feel rooted in a community slowly becoming home again. On a clear evening nearly 2 months after the auction that had upended everything, Cale requested a private audience with her in the same garden her fragmented memory had once shown her, moonlight silvering the same rows of flowers she now recognized clearly as her own favorite blooms, planted deliberately during the earliest days of their bond. "I did not bring you here to reenact old memories," Cale said, standing beside her among the fragrant blossoms, torchlight flickering gently from lanterns strung along the garden path. "I brought you here because I wanted to ask you something honestly, without any assumption of what your answer should be." Mira turned to face him fully, her memories no longer fragmented ghosts, but a steadily solidifying foundation beneath her sense of self. "Ask then." "The bond between us never fully severed," Cale said quietly. "I know that now, and I believe some part of you has always known it too, even through the fog of your missing memories. But I do not want you standing beside me out of obligation to a bond neither of us fully controls. I want to know, now that you remember enough to choose freely, whether you wish to remain my mate, and eventually, my queen, not because fate demanded it 3 years ago, but because you choose it now, with full knowledge of everything that choice requires." Mira considered his words carefully, feeling the weight of them settle honestly into her chest, rather than pressuring her toward any predetermined answer. She thought of the woman she had been before the raid, stubborn and clever, and unafraid to challenge power, even at great personal risk. She thought of the woman she had become during 2 years of fog and survival among strangers, learning to read danger in the smallest shift of expression, learning to trust her own judgment above all else. And she thought of the woman standing here now, memories restored, scar visible, choosing deliberately, rather than simply falling back into a life predetermined by fate alone. "I remember enough now," she said softly, "to know that loving you was never a mistake. even knowing everything it eventually cost me. And I know myself well enough now, after everything I survived alone, to say with certainty that I am choosing this, choosing you. Not because the bond demands it, but because I want to build whatever comes next, deliberately, with open eyes. Cale's expression softened with a depth of relief and joy that finally, fully, replaced 3 years of carefully hidden grief. He reached for her hand, and this time, when his fingers closed gently around hers, she felt no hesitation at all, only the quiet, steady certainty of a bond finally, truly reclaimed, rather than merely remembered. "Then let the pack know," Cale said, "that their queen has returned, not as a ghost reclaiming a life that was stolen from her, but as a woman who survived everything meant to break her, and chose, in the end, to come home anyway." Word spread through Blackthorn's stronghold within days, and when the formal announcement finally came before the full assembled pack, Mira stood beside Cale not as the fragile, masked stranger carried home from an illegal auction, but as Lyra Ashbourne, Queen of Blackthorn, survivor of betrayal and captivity, and living proof that even the most carefully constructed deception could not erase the truth of who she had always been. Garrick awaited final judgment in a secure cell beneath the stronghold, his fate to be decided once the full extent of his crimes had been properly documented and presented before neighboring pack leaders, whose trade relations had also suffered from his years of hidden fraud. Corwin, having cooperated fully with the investigation, faced lesser consequences, stripped of his patrol duties, but spared harsher punishment in recognition of his eventual honesty. As for Mira, the scar along her temple remained visible whenever she chose not to cover it, a quiet reminder, worn openly rather than hidden away in shame. She had spent 2 years believing herself nameless, discarded, and forgotten, only to discover that the truth of who she was had never truly disappeared at all, merely waited patiently, protected by an unbreakable bond, and a scent that refused to lie. For the moment, she would finally, fully reclaim it. Standing beside Cale on the high balcony overlooking Blackthorn's torchlit courtyard, listening to the pack below cheering their queen's return, Mira felt the last remnants of fog lift entirely from her mind, leaving behind not the fragile, uncertain stranger who had stepped off that auction stage months earlier, but a woman whole, chosen, and utterly certain of exactly who she was, and exactly where she belonged. The night the Alpha King thought he had lost everything had instead marked the beginning of the truth finally clawing its way home, and as the moon rose full and bright over the towers of Blackthorn, casting silver light across two mates finally, truly reunited, both of them understood with quiet certainty that whatever challenges still awaited them, they would face them together, unshakable, exactly as fate, and their own hearts, had always intended.